Hi, this is Greg Regan, President of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. I'm here today with Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton of Washington, D.C., to talk about how the bipartisan infrastructure law makes long-term investments in our nation's transit and our nation's capital. Congresswoman Norton is the second most senior member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in the House of Representatives, and she is also the chair of the Highways and Transit Subcommittee. She has been a longtime champion of public transportation and its workforce throughout her solid career in Congress. Congresswoman, it's great to be with you.
My pleasure to be with you.
Well, I'd like to start about last week's exciting announcement. The Department of Transportation announced the availability of grants for major infrastructure projects across the country. The grants were part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which you helped champion, and would address the nation's most pressing transportation needs. You've been a staunch advocate for Union Station in DC, and this seems like an historic opportunity to expand this vital transit hub. Can you talk about the vision for Union Station and how you're going to make sure these funds improve the transit in the nation's capital?
Oh, this is one of the most important parts of the bill and the funding we got. We're going to do a remake of Union Station. You know, Union Station is a terminus for the north, a terminus for the south. And the money in the bill will be very important for Union Station in particular. There's $1.5 billion in there for Amtrak, $820 million for the Northeast Corridor. This is the first time that we have done for Union Station, which is a federal entity and therefore does qualify for federal money. This is the first time we've done this kind of a large take on redoing Union Station.
Well, that's great. And, you know, I think that there's no better example about the lack of investment in transportation and in transit and in rail than right here in Washington, D.C. I mean, we've seen the impacts of underinvestment, deferred maintenance here every single day on our metro system and in terms of passenger rail. So this is going to go a long way towards improving transportation, not only here, but throughout the country as well. As the chair of the Highways and Transit Subcommittee, you're going to be monitoring how this bill is implemented and how the funds are expended. What role is the committee playing in overseeing this money in order to ensure that it meets the high expectations that we all have in terms of equity, access, and job creation?
Well, the Highways and Transit Subcommittee is the largest subcommittee in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I'm going to hold a hearing on surface transportation on its construction workforce next month to look at jobs created by the new law and the pipeline for workers to fill them. We've got to make sure that we do have those workers. I am, as you know, up to chair the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I'm ahead and believe that I will, in fact, be doing that. So I'm going to be having a whole series of hearings on how do we implement this new law. The law that the Democrats put forward would have been even better, but this is good enough for us to start on a new 21st century version of transportation and infrastructure, where we don't simply expand roads to the next road, but look to the future and what the transportation system will actually need.
Well, I'm really glad you raised workforce training and making sure we have the people that are ready to do the work. And that's true at the construction phase, as you mentioned. It's also true in terms of transit operations and in terms of rail operations. We need to make sure that as we look at expanding services for these critical transportation modes in our country, that we have the workforce that's trained and ready to not only meet the service expansion, but also to operate newer technologies like green buses and electric buses, things like that. So I think job creation and job training go hand in hand. And I hope that with your help and with the committee's help, that DOT and the federal government is working to make sure that these are all going to be, that their job creation is part of the funding request and part of the development as we move forward.
Or else the bill won't move forward. And you mentioned training, which is, as you say, with the new technology and the the 21st century look at this, that this bill provides, training is going to be essential, an essential part of this bill.
And how do you see different components of this bill advancing our shared goals of increasing equity and making sure that there's more access for people who have traditionally been underrepresented and underserved by transportation?
Equity is an important part of this bill. It includes investments in public transportation that will connect communities, that make transit stations more available to those with disabilities. So equity is an important part of this bill.
And you look, the people that we represent in TTD and with the transportation trades are ready to get to work. We're eager to make sure that we can build a modern, efficient, safe, and more equitable transportation network throughout our country. We look forward to working with you at every step of the way as we get moving here, as well as the DOT. But are there any other thoughts you'd like to add before we close?
Certainly so, because this bill does include important sections that we've not included before. For example, reducing carbon pollution. It makes strong investments in addressing climate change. We've got $44 billion. I looked up that figure in new programs such as carbon reduction, electric vehicle charging stations. We have one in the House of Representatives, and I want to get an electric car, so I'm very glad we have one there. There are going to be resilient grants for which transit projects are available. Safety is a very important part of this bill. There are billions in funding for highway, surface transportation, truck, and bus safety programs, and bridge investments that promote safety. So this is a very comprehensive bill. I can't wait to begin the process of implementing it in hearings.
Well, and I think you make a really important point about greening our infrastructure, because everything that is in here really does go towards greening infrastructure. Even improving our roads and bridges will make our systems more efficient and actually reduce carbon emissions. But more importantly, improving the efficiency and the efficacy of our transit systems, our rail systems, getting more people on public transportation that is electrified. There is no faster way to green our infrastructure than through investment in these public transportation systems. And your leadership has been critical there.
And that will continue to be a priority if, as I believe, I become chair of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about this important bill. And I know this is only the beginning of a much larger conversation that we're going to be having over the years to come here.
To be sure. Look forward.